This poor lady was having a big problem with her husband. Every single night, the husband come back home drunk, beat her up, beat up the children, mess up the house. She couldn't take it anymore. She was sharing this experience with one of her friends, and her friend says, well, I have the same problem, and I took care of it in a very strange way, but it worked. So the desperate woman says, what did you do? She says, well, one night I dressed up like that, you know, a skeleton, ugly looking thing. And I was outside the house waiting for him. He came back, he saw this thing in front of the door, and he said, who is that? And I said, Dad, I'm waiting for you. He got so scared that he gave up drinking altogether. The desperate woman says, gee, I'm going to try that too. And sure enough, that night, dressed up like a skeleton, probably looking outside the door, her husband comes back home, totally drunk. And he says, who's that? And she says, Dad, I'm waiting for you. And he says, oh my God, I thought it was my wife. Now recognizing people is something we run into quite often. And in fact, that happens just about every day. To me, I see people, Father, remember me? You baptized me. Yes, I do. We were much smaller at the time. But today, this is what happens. There is someone who doesn't recognize Jesus. He doesn't recognize Jesus in the description of his friends, of his apostles. They had seen him, they said, we saw him, he says, I don't believe it. I don't want to recognize him. And so we start from there to trace the life of a good Christian. The first thing we need to do is recognize and accept Jesus. We have to recognize him. The problem with Thomas, doubting Thomas, we have the expression in English, was the fact that he was a slave of his senses. Remember what he said? I got to touch, I got to hear, I got to put my hand, I got to... Slave of his senses, that's not believing, that's seeing. And then it was part of the world where seeing is believing, the world in which we belong. And Jesus told them, you have come to believe because you have seen. Blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. Because Jesus, by giving us faith, created a world where believing is seeing. And that's a much more beautiful world than the one we live in. Much more beautiful world. There you can really see Christ. And you can see him in yourself. You can see him in your neighbors, in your friends all around you. You can see him in the circumstances of life. You can feel the presence of Jesus everywhere. Isn't it true that most of the time we can feel his presence here in church? I hope. But once we leave the church, how often do we recognize him? As you leave the church now, at the end of this Mass, and a quote-unquote bum crosses your path, how many of you will recognize Jesus in that person? You will not. You will not. That's the first thing. We have to recognize him and believe in him. Now the second step in the life of a good Christian is presented in the second reading. The reading of John, the vision. John, remember, was the disciple who described himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And his love for Jesus was so intense that he shares with us in the second reading a moment of ecstasy. You know what ecstasy is? Thank God, I'm not a drug user, sorry. Some people use this stuff. That's not what John had in mind. Ecstasy is such a terrific union between a person and God that the rest of the world like disappears, and the only thing they can see is God. And sometimes they have terrific, beautiful experiences that go along with ecstasy. A couple of years ago, I thought that was, I experienced a moment of ecstasy. I was in my room in easy chair meditating. It was an intense meditation. All at once, I felt the room tremble a little bit. I said, oh man, am I that far? Then we discovered that Baltimore had an earthquake that year. Remember? We had a little earthquake. That wasn't my moment of ecstasy. But ecstasy is something which none of us will experience. But intense union with Christ should be part of our life. We can't just, oh, I believe in Jesus. No. He should be part of us. expression, let's be possessed by Jesus. Let him take you. Let him be part of you. Let him join you in every experience of your life. Let him be with you wherever you go, whatever you're doing. That's what John is telling us. That's where he was able to elevate himself to this beautiful experience of ecstasy. So the first thing is recognizing Jesus through faith. The second thing is possessing him, having him with you, day in and day out, every single minute of your life. There should never be a minute where we are apart from Jesus. And then we come to the third moment of Christian living, which is described in the first reading today. We went backwards, as you can see. We started from the Gospel, second reading, first reading. And the first reading, if you remember, we saw Peter going through and healing people, and even just a shadow of it, Peter would be beneficial to people around him. And all that Peter was doing was sharing Christ with others. And that is the third moment of our Christian living. Once we accept him and believe in him, once we become possessed by him, then we have to share him with others. And if our possession of Christ is such, that becomes very impressive. It's incredible the good we can do. It's incredible the good we can do. I always say, any good Christian will convert more people than the best preachers on earth. Every good Christian will bring more people to heaven than any priest from the pulpit. Because you, by being good, by doing your thing, as Christians, are sharing Christ with others. So this is the beautiful message that the church gives us today. First, believe. At the end of the gospel today, all these signs were given to you so that you might believe. Second, possess. Make sure that Christ is you and you are Christ. And third, share. Share by your goodness, share by your generosity, share by your willingness to serve others, share by your love. This is the total life of a Christian. Now let's look into our own life and say, is that where I am? I don't know the answer to your life, to your question. I know the answer to mine. And if you're not there, get there as quickly as you can.